Welcome back, my friend, to Healing Together, a YouTube channel dedicated to the God stories that happens in our lives. We love to further the kingdom by telling of the great things that God does in our life. My friend, we are about to move further on with a great story of Kevin and Jody and how God used them to build the kingdom through saving children who were very special needs. And so today we're going to meet Diane and we're going to hear that story. This is going to be the main part of her story. So come along, let's hear what they have and how they experienced and how they got started. Diane is the first child that they originally fostered and then adopted. And so come along, let's hear how the story got started. Stay to the end if you would. I'm going to share Kevin's two of Kevin's books that he has written. I believe he has 11 so far. So I'm going to share these two. Please stick around and watch the end video and we will share those books. We'll leave the links in the comments. And so thank you very much for stopping by. Hit that like button and that subscribe button, the notifications bell. We greatly appreciate it. Enjoy your time. Thank you. So did you adopt first or did you have children first?
Children.
Children
Yes.
first, okay.
Yeah, we had Alex down in Cottage Grove. Well, we were still in Cresswell. We ended up attending that church ourselves
For a couple of years, yeah.
for a couple of years, and his parents actually came out and met their new grandson there.
Okay.
I don't. And then
Well-
we ended up.
Well, we went from Cresswell up to Springfield for about a year
Because I got work there.
because she got work there, and I was working at a print shop up there, and then my dad was really needling me to come back, and I don't say that in a negative way, but needling me to come back to Denver and work with him in his office. And it was a good experience, but it really tested our marriage in a lot of different ways. But that year in Denver produced another son, and so we ended up having two boys by the time we left Denver and went back to Portland.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went back to Portland for a while. Okay.
Yeah, I got a job in Portland. I was nursing shortages were happening at that time, and so when I applied for a position back in Portland, they paid for everything. They paid for me to move. They,
Nice.
the whole 9 yards. So we were able to do that, and my parents actually helped. My mom helped me with the baby because I had just had Steven, so she rode in the car with me and helped me with him and
Nice.
that kind of thing. And I was accepting a position being the charge nurse at a cardiac telemetry unit. The wonderful thing about my nursing career was I was able to do different things. I always encourage gals to go into nursing because it's never a dull moment. If you don't like this department, you can learn about this one and transfer. I mean, because when I was first out, I was in maternity and I actually helped deliver babies because the country doc didn't get there on time. And so
Sure.
and I worked with midwives and then we had, when we were back in Denver, I worked at a neurotrauma center, and took care of spinal cord injuries, brain injuries, and all of those kinds of patients. Very hard work.
Oh, my.
Very hard work. Didn't like that one, but I did learn a lot from that. And then like I said, I transferred to the cardiac unit. So,
Kevin, you spent some time in ministry as a pastor. How did that come about?
Well, that's a little bit of a long, drawn-out process.
it's the wrong question for right now because he didn't do that until after the kids.
Okay, that's what I was
Yeah.
wondering. Okay.
The way we, I mean, we'd be millionaires if we. I'm serious.
Oh, I'm sure.
We would
I'm sure.
seriously be millionaires and
Wow.
have mega bucks if we hadn't adopted a child, 1, 2,
Yeah.
3, and so on, because he was such a great photographer.
Okay.
He was a national and international photographer. He had clients in New York City and all across the country, Texaco, and all of these different places, you know.
We
And
need to
so-
talk about that next. Yeah,
That's
So how did you
his
get into
legacy. Is
sure.
he
Okay.
he was a great photographer.
that? Okay. So how did you get into photography? I mean, we're not talking about an iPhone back in the 80s.
Oh no,
No.
We're talking about real photography.
Cameras, right.
with his
Dark room
real
and
dark
that.
room.
Yeah,
He had a
dark room.
in the house.
Yeah.
Every house had to have a dark room.
Yeah, that's true. We had to build one into every house, didn't we?
Uh-huh.
When I was in high school, actually my photography goes back to junior high.
Okay.
One year I somehow got the idea that I really wanted a camera, and so I talked to my parents about it for getting one for Christmas, and they had a really good time with me on that because they didn't bring the package out until early Christmas morning. So all this time leading up to Christmas, I'm thinking I'm not getting the camera. I'm not getting the camera. And Christmas morning comes, and of course, that is the last package that they drag out of the closet for me. And but I was in photography through high school. I was on the yearbook and the newspaper staff. And it was in the high school that I also went to work for a photographer who was a wedding and portrait photographer. And Tony was just a wonderful, very, very talented man. And I worked with him for many years. Even when I was in college there in Denver, I would work out of his studio, doing darkroom work or whatever. Tony was a good mentor in a lot of different ways. I remember trying to share the Lord with him a lot of times, and Tony had this really gruff, he was a heavy smoker, and he just had this gruff sound like, well, that's good for you, kind of a thing. And but I loved him, and I loved his family. He had a great family. They all worked together in the studio. And then I met another photographer in Portland, or in Denver, Connie, who was a commercial photographer. And so I started working with him quite a bit too. And I really enjoyed the commercial aspect of photography. So when I got back from college and I moved up to Portland, I just decided that's what I really want to do. And that's how the photography really came about. Just started building on it and buying equipment. And
You said you went to your dad's office. What was he involved in, newspaper or?
no, he was an accountant.
He was an accountant.
He was an accountant.
So nothing to do with the
Had
photography?
nothing to do with photography.
Okay.
So it was. I will say this: I kind of tested the waters of my marriage a little bit, because when I was back in Denver, I was trying to do some things that I had no business doing.
Okay.
Didn't actually have an adulterous relationship, but I was sure pursuing it. I found myself doing something that I hated doing, which was accounting, and Jody was busy at work, and I mean, you can make excuses for it, But basically what it comes down to is I was pursuing the wrong things.
How did God bring you back? Or did God bring you back?
Oh, he did.
Okay.
Yeah, he did. As a photographer, that's something that you're frequently, especially as a young photographer, you frequently encounter. And I was. There were just some different things that happened during that time in Denver, which kind of led me away from those kind of considerations. I'm not sure I can really say what it was, but I think the biggest, strongest pull was Jody. Was that I just found myself realizing what I was kind of doing in relation to her, and so I pulled back from it. I remember I had another situation in Portland, and the lady was really pursuing me, and what I remember the most was that one day I was driving home from her office. She and I worked very closely together for JCPenney, and on advertising, and I just had this. I can't even remember exactly how the vision started, but I just had this vision. You've seen times where weather cameras or something like that, they have a spider that's crawling across the lens. I had that kind of a vision in my mind. And it was like the Lord was saying, she's going to eat you if you pursue this. And it just shook the dickens out of me, and I backed away from it immediately. I think there's just times in our lives where the Lord may use something in our lives that's scary to try and get us to realize what we're walking into. So,
when and how did God break your guys' hearts for children?
The thing that happened that got us totally involved in taking in children started with Diane. And Diane, I became, after the cardiac care unit, I applied, always thinking, keep climbing the corporate ladder, keep climbing. There's more pay, there's bigger things you can do. So I applied to become the evening supervisor at the largest hospital in Portland, Oregon. And I got it. I came from a diploma grad nursing school. I should never have gotten it. They wanted somebody who had a degree. I didn't have a degree. But they brought in all of these people and this round table interview to fire questions at me. And because of I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that because of my experience in the country hospital, working, because down there you end up working different hats, even though I was charge nurse of maternity and delivering babies. If there was an emergency down in emergency and they needed extra hands, you went down there. And if they needed extra hands in ICU, you went over there. And so you were constantly running around, and I, having grown up with brothers, I was never intimidated by a doctor. I've never been intimidated by any of them. I can walk right up to them and I can ask the question and just say, why aren't you doing something about this? What about this approach? And so because of that, and because of the firing of the questions and my ability to give off-the-cuff answers to them that made sense to them, because you're not just, as a supervisor in a large hospital, I had to make rounds twice during my shift. I had to do all the staffing. I had to pinch hit. I had to run and do the life flight, meet all of that, get the OR crew in when the crew needed. I had to talk to the newspapers when when there was these great tragedies. All of these, and go to where patients' families were like this, wanting to have some kind of huge argument in front of their family member about what the doctor was doing and have to calm them down, that kind of thing. You have to be diplomatic. Well, that's what I would do. All throughout the hospital, twice a night, and even run over to the rehab center and back. And on those rounds, in the pediatric ICU was the, there's your one. In the pediatric ICU, there was constantly this one little girl was in there. And she was in there, and she was on the roster every night. And finally I asked the charge nurse, and I said, who is she and what's she doing? Why is she still here? Because usually if some child was severe, then they would transfer them to a child rehab kind of facility or a care facility where they would, probably get minimal care or whatever, but you can't keep them in ICU, it's like major costs.
Right.
And yet she was a
And
very
she was
medically
there.
fragile girl.
Yeah, and so, Cindy said, come over and see her. That just started the whole thing. Come and see her. Isn't she cute? And I'm like, yeah, she's cute. I said, what's the deal? Well, every time anybody takes her home, she's going to a medical foster home. She has to. But every time she gets there, she knows she's not here. And so she holds her breath and turns blue so that they panic and they bring her right back. And so she never stays in anybody's home. She's got them all.
Oh my goodness.
Buffalo.
Yes.
Yeah, she'd been there so long that was her home.
Oh.
Peds ICU was her home. And it was so severe that the back of her head was flat, her little buns and everything about her was atrophied. And she was never supposed to eat, drink, walk, talk, or do anything.
Goodness.
She had been abused by her father. Her father...
At a month old.
Yep, at about 4 to 6 weeks. She developed a type of pneumonia. And the thing is that her system was so severely depleted that she stopped breathing one time while he was drunk, and he shook her. Shaken baby syndrome is what he gave her. He shook her and trying to get her to breathe, and then he blew in her, and he blew holes in her lungs, her esophagus, and her diaphragm. And so she was life flighted from Pendleton, Oregon to our hospital in Portland, Oregon. And she was brought in, and she was in ICU ever since. Well, so I said, so what's the deal? Do you think that, we could take her home? And so I called Kevin when I went back to the office, and I said, honey, you need to come up here. I want you to see this little baby and see if we can bring her home.
Remember that dog that you were telling
Yeah.
about earlier?
He doesn't get to see dogs. We just bring those in and shock him. But no, children, he gets to come and see. But I know the drill. Once he sees them, he's a marshmallow and he can't not take them home. And that continued for quite a while because that's how we got Eric too. I said, come and see him, look at him, you know. But no, that's Diane, that was her. That's how we brought her home. And she was super, super sick. And she had been on antibiotics for a long time. She was severely sick. She had a feeding tube, and she couldn't roll over. She couldn't do anything. And I took her to the doctors every day, because she was getting worse and worse once we brought her home. I didn't take her back to the unit. I took her to the doctors, and he says, we're not going to give her any more antibiotics. I'm not going to do it. Her system has to kick in. And she got grayer and sicker and worse every day. Until finally I told Kevin, I said, she's going to die. She's going to die if we don't do something. Came home, and I had taken her in during the day. He said the same thing. And so that evening, I waited until the clinic was closed, and I called to see who was on call. And it was a different doctor. And I told him the situation, and I said, I'm afraid she's going to die. I need somebody to look at her and to help me. Because back then, see, today, if a child like that, you'd be sent home with monitors, with oxygen, with all of these breathing treatments. And she was on anti-seizure meds and congestive heart failure meds. She was on all of these meds and the tube feedings, and just getting worse and worse, totally gray. And he said, meet me at the first little hospital that I worked at before. He says, meet me in the ER parking lot. And I pulled up in there, and he got out of his car. He came over and he took one look at her, and he said, you drive as fast as you can. I'll call Cindy right now, and I'll have him set up a bed for her. He says, this is ridiculous. And they got her in there, and they found out that what was causing it was that she had this huge abscess here by her esophagus and such up in here that they had to go in and drain. And then they had to leave a drain in, and we had to bring her home with all this stuff oozing out of her. And from that point on, then I had to do chest therapy on her every hour, every night, to keep her alive, to keep her lungs clear. And you do the tube feeding, and it would regurge onto the bed. Have to change it every hour, all night long, you know. So.
And you were still nursing. You were still doing nursing.
Had two little boys.
And,
Yep. And my husband was working. Yep.
He was working.
Yep. And then little by little, the Lord told me to start taking her off the meds. I said, she's got to learn to eat. So I started taking her off the meds. Who in their right mind would have done that? I mean, seriously. I'd be taken to jail, literally.
Sure.
Taking her off of those meds. But I knew that if she stayed on the phenobarbital, that she would never wake up enough to ever want to eat. Okay? And she never put anything in her mouth. And so I weaned her off of those, weaned her off the congestive heart failure stuff, kept doing the therapy for her. And then the reality is that little by little, I got her to eat. But it took a long road because she would spit it out. Because she was so unfamiliar with having anything in the mouth. And we were told that her lungs were so scarred that her lungs and her heart was so enlarged and her lungs were so scarred that it would take 6 to 7 years for them to heal. And then we went and took her up to the doctor, to the cardiac doctor, and the lung guy, and checking her in. They do the EKG, they do the chest X-ray, and then they have me take her back and sit in the waiting room waiting for them to come in and tell me. And I knew I was in for it, because if they found out I took her off all that stuff and it was worse, I was going to be in big trouble.
Yeah, remember she was a foster care child.
Yeah.
So the stakes were a lot higher.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was like sitting there going, oh God, help me, help me, help me, Lord.
Yes. Right. Wow.
And the guy comes in like this and he goes, what is this? What on earth have you done? And I'm like, what? She's totally healed.
Oh.
She is totally healed. There's no more scars. Her heart is back to normal. Everything looks great.
Praise
What
God.
happened? I said,
Wow.
God.
Yay.
God happened.
Wow.
And he was like, I am going to remember this. He says, we coded that little girl. He points to her and goes, we coded her so many times. And there was so many times I thought, we got to quit it. We got to quit. We got to just let her go. And he says, now this will keep me from letting a kid go. I will keep
Praise
going.
God.
Mhm.
Wow.
I'm
Wow.
going, wow,
Yay.
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
And then when she was eating and we got to take the tube out, the one doctor, the behavioral specialist that was for the feeding problems and stuff, she just came to me and she said, do you think you could give a class and tell us how you did this? Because I've got so many other kids that are on tubes that they won't eat. I says, well, they got to get hungry. It's
Yes.
a matter of, it's
Mhm.
Sure.
just logical,
Yes.
really, isn't it?
Right.
So,
Wow.
Well, I would like to add to this is that Jody was so attentive. Jody was so attentive to Diane during that time. And a whole lot of prayer went into that too. I mean, Jody was saying that the doctor said, well, we had to code her. I remember being told that they coded her like 9 times before we brought her home.
yeah.
And then once we got her home, Jody was always running her back and forth to the hospital, and she was coded like another 9 times after we got her
Well,
home.
that night when I took her there and Cindy took over, Cindy says, you go home. You look spent. And so I went
And she
home.
was.
And then by midnight, Cindy's calling me and going, I just want you to know I'm glad you brought her. We just had to code her.
Now, when you
And
say
then
coder, you're talking about her
CPR
heart start.
and put her on the vent, put her on the machines, do the whole 9 yards. And then she called me 3 hours later and said they did it again.
And she's only like 7 or 8 months old at this point.
Yeah,
She's still just a little tiny infant.
tiny
Yes.
baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, tiny baby. Uh-huh.
I mean, I helped her however I could,
Right.
but I mean, it was like Jody just, I mean, she literally was putting in
Yeah.
24-hour days
Sure. Yeah.
because Diane needed it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. God's good.
And
And,
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
and may I ask, how is Diane today?
Eating, drinking, walking, talking, serving the Lord.
sometimes
taking
a little
care
more
of
than we'd,
people.
yeah.
Yeah.
Praise God.
Taking care of senior citizens
Right.
in
Yeah.
Raleigh, North Carolina.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, praise God.
She's-
Well, that's where we're going to end it for today. Make sure you come back for the next episode and see where we go with this. They're going to go ahead and tell us some more about Diane and where she is at today. I want to draw your attention to a couple books. First of all, as I did in the first set of videos, or in the first video, I introduced to you Promises Kept. And I want to make sure that you know that everything that you're going to hear on this series of videos is recorded in these books. And so please take a moment and order this book off the internet. It would be a very, very good read. It is a very good read. It's called Promises Kept. The link is in the description. Also, Kevin spent 14 years writing a daily email, and when he retired and he stopped writing those emails, I believe it was to a school, he compiled all of those emails, and he chose 300, I believe, and 65 of them, and he put them into a book called They Left Their Nets and Followed Him. I have used this book as a daily devotional, and it is extremely good. There are short ones, a little bit longer ones. None of them are tremendously long. They're all very quick reads. So in the description, again, we're going to have the link to this book. If you would be ready for a new devotional, this would be a great book to pick up for it, maybe for the beginning of next year. However you want to do it. It's broke up by days, and it is a extremely good read. In the description, I will have the links for both of those. Thank you, my friend, for stopping by. Please continue to pray for us as we reach out and try to spread God's stories in the world today. Believe me, we need encouragement. Come back on Tuesday, and we are going to have another story from Kevin and Jody. I look forward to us getting back together. Please hit that like button, the subscribe button, the notifications bell. We would appreciate it. And one more time, my friends, I want to ask you to pray for my daughter and her family who is on Pine Island in Florida. Probably by now they've been able to get at least one of them off of there. They're thinking about trying to set up a supply line. It is a real disaster what Ian did in Florida. So please pray for them if you would. We would greatly appreciate it. Have a great time, my friends. We'll see you again on Tuesday. Thank you for stopping by. God bless.